Most classes that I teach at Freed-Hardeman are classes that deal with family. My training is all in family matters, from counseling to understanding how the family dynamics and that kind of thing. I don't consider myself an expert at all. I've gone through a lot of education to be able to go on this side and say, well, I think I know a little bit, but I'm not sure I know everything. In fact, I'm pretty confident I don't know everything. There's two things that I typically try to get my students to do. One is be reflective about their own families, and I have a series of things that I do with my students to try to get them to think through some things. But the other thing that I try to do with my students is, I have to assess grades, so they get to write. And in most of my classes, I have them write about their families, and I direct them, depending on which class, what specific information I'm wanting them to be reflective on and to write about. So this morning I woke up about 4:30, which is pretty common for me, and I thought, well, let's be productive. I had an assignment that was due yesterday from one of my classes. They were to write about their families. And I decided, well, I'll get up and grade papers this morning and read my student papers. It never ceases to amaze me. Now, these are students at Freed-Hardeman. Never ceases to amaze me the diversity of backgrounds. One student writes about growing up in a family where there was a strong mom and dad, and church was always a part of their life, and they were supposed to be reflective about how their religious values got transmitted to them. That's what that paper was about. Talk about your family and how your family passed on religious values. And they would talk about parents and grandparents in church and different activities and all of that kind of stuff. And then I get to this next student's paper, and it's my parents divorced when they were young. My mom was a drug addict. My dad was an alcoholic. And they go down the line of all the things that didn't work. And then they said, I came here and I found God. My question isn't whether or not Freed-Hardeman can help students find God. We can. We do. I don't have any doubt about that. My question in my mind is, why did you come to Freed-Hardeman? What was there inside of you as a person that said, I could go anywhere, but I want to go to a faith-based institution? Not because they were members of the church, not because they had any religious history. Why? Can you tell me why? What makes a person who doesn't know God choose a faith-based institution? Searching. That's exactly right. Searching. Trying to find something. I would suggest to you that student, and by the way, that's not just one student in that class of 21. Multiple students had similar stories. I would suggest to you that our young people are searching. They are looking. Not all of them, obviously, but they are looking for something. Something that is in some measure tangible enough that they can hold on to it and say, this is mine. This is what makes sense to me. In that process, starting our time off today, I want to talk about your connection with God and how that influences your children. Your connection with God and how it influences your children. I know. You're thinking, well, what about my children's connection to God? Okay, so let me just be very frank here. They're not here. I can't talk to them. They're not in the room. They're only in the room in your mind. You see their faces. Even now as I'm talking, you know your children, you see their faces, you can call their name. If you're young enough, you'll get it right the first time. Otherwise, you got to, oh no, that's that. And you see their name, you know their face, you know their personality, you know their disposition, you know what they're struggling with, you know what you're struggling with. So I can only talk to you. But if I talk to you, maybe some things that we'll talk about this morning gives you permission on how to talk to your own child. Is that fair? Okay. So we're going to start with some intergenerational stuff, some differences between the generations, kind of like what we did last night. There's a host of research out there about generational differences. We talk about generational differences because there really are generational differences. There really are different ways in which the different generations look at life and engage life and think about life. And those differences make it important for us to recognize not just merely the differences, but how to engage those differences. So let me I need to stick with my notes a little bit here. Let me start off with the iGen generation. Those are those folks born between 1996 and 2015. Last night we had several of you who said you had iGen children. These children are this generation is experiencing a number of differences from their previous generations, typically their parents, Gen X folks. Number one, these children biologically are maturing faster. We really do, and we saw it starting with the boomers, but we've perfected it now. These kids are ingesting food that is top quality. Top quality. And it has a biological effect on them. They are surrounded by good food, good environments, good air, clean water. They've got it, and their bodies respond, and this generation is hitting puberty early. The girls, on average, 9 and 10. Wow. Boys, 10, 11. Wow, that's faster than any generation. So biologically, they're maturing quicker. The saying right now is for the generation, 14 is the new 24. 14 is the new 24. Second reason why that's true, it's not only biologically they're maturing faster, but they're being exposed to ideas and thoughts much, much quicker. The technology of our day, which the iGen generation is completely immersed in, allows them to deal with thoughts and ideas that most of us didn't deal with until we became adults. In fact, their entire life is based upon technology. I asked my students, talk to me about how you talk to other people. You know what they hear when I ask that question? What am I doing right now? Go ahead. What? Talking. That's not what they hear. Texting. So I asked them, what does it mean to talk to someone? Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, chat, any kind of chat room, texting. What about email? That's you guys. That's old folk stuff. Email. TikTok is just blowing out. I mean, it's expanding. Don't warp your mind by looking at TikTok. But your kids are. And they're immersed in it. And they're coming across all this stuff. They've known nothing but technology. They've known nothing but a phone in their hand from early on in life. And that phone, that mini computer that they carry around, gives them access to everything. And then on top of that, they have lots of social media. I ask my kids, tell me what social media you're a part of. You know the one word I never hear anymore? Facebook. Yeah, Facebook. That's old folk stuff. We got our new stuff. And they start telling me their apps, and I'm going, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. But they do. And through that application, they are being exposed to all kinds of thoughts and ideas, but they're also being told whether they're good or bad. Because every time they post, people respond. And as long as they're getting likes, they feel good. One dislike can ruin their day. 14's the new 24. They're having to grow up really, really fast. We're not going backwards. We're not. In order for them not to be exposed to all of this, you would have to, number one, take your own phone out. Do you know how many parents I see, which is fine. Again, it's just the reality of generations, who have games on their phone for their 3-year-old to play. Yeah. And to keep the 3-year-old quiet in church, they give them the phone. Turn the sound off, hopefully. Sometimes they don't. And you know, their 3-year-old's playing. That's all they know. And unless we do away with our phones, unless we do away with the technology in our own life, we're not going backwards. I don't want to give up email, even if it is old school. I don't want to give it up. Okay. So they're growing up faster biologically, they're growing up faster psychologically, but emotionally they're not prepared. They're just not prepared emotionally. On average, today's teenager will spend 5 hours a day on their phone. On average, we old folks, we boomers, will pick up our phones 80 plus times a day, on average. That means there's some of you who do it a lot more than that. You're going, I don't do it 80 times. Look at the guy next to you and they go, yeah, I'm the 100 guy, right? We have constantly seen trends emerging from this iGen generation. Only 20% of the iGen generation, based on current projections as well as current practices, only 20% will get married before age 30. For us boomers, it was 60%. They're getting married later and later. So 14 is the new 24. There's a second saying that goes with that. 28's the new 18. 28's the new 18. They're not growing up. They're growing up, but they're not growing up. Boomers had this idea, and in fact, the research points it out, that there were several markers that determined that we had grown up, that we were in the adult world. Those markers included things like going to college, getting married, having a child, being financially stable. All of those were adult things. And when we reached them, we knew we had reached adulthood. I was 21 when I got married. Barbara was 20. My parents were 18. We were late. Do you know today's generation says here are the markers of adulthood? financial security, taking responsibility, leaving home. And the leaving home part isn't important as the other two. 40% of the iGen generation will stay at your house for a lot longer than you want them to. They'll even help out financially, but they're not ready to go off. 28's the new 18. So if they're not getting married until past the age of 30, when do they have kids? 35, 40, right. Right. Later and later. That becomes important for what we're going to talk about today. Those kind of generational differences become important to us just to understand. I'm not through yet. George Barna, I don't know if you're familiar with that name, but his company has been doing research on religious matters in the United States for decades. He published a new report that came out at the end of 2021. He found that 40% of millennials, those are the people born between 1981 and 1995. 40% of millennials fit into what he categorized as the don't category. Don't category. They don't believe, they don't know if God exists, they don't care if God exists, or they don't believe that He exists. 40%. Don't know, don't care, not sure. 40%. Only 33% of millennials believe that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, perfect, and a creator. Only 33%. And we look at that generation and we think, what's happened? What's happened? So let me go back to the boomers, would you? The boomers really aren't much better, generationally. As of today, Pew Research at the end of 2021 published that only 29% of all Americans identify with any religious group. Only 29% in the entirety of the United States identify with a religious group. That's not just millennials. That's boomers. That's Gen Xers. Only 45% of the American population say they pray daily. Only 45%. 15 years ago, that number was 60%. Fewer and fewer people are walking into church buildings. So we have entered into what Christian Smith and his research calls the moralistic therapeutic deism stage. Moralistic therapeutic deism stage. 3 great words. Means this. Moralistic means be a good person. Therapeutic means religion is all about making you feel good. Deism is all about God is there, but He's not active. Be good, feel good, don't worry about God. Moralistic, theistic, or therapeutic deism. I think Christian Smith has hit well on what's happening. Is that discouraging to you? Is all that discouraging to you? Does it make you feel hopeless? Make you feel like, man, we're just fighting an uphill battle? Let's go back to last night. It's not new. It isn't new. Barbara and I both grew up in Nashville. I don't know that I mentioned that earlier. We grew up in this city, a little community to the north and east of downtown Nashville called Inglewood. Anybody know Inglewood? Oh, good. At the time when we were children, the mayor of Memphis lived in Inglewood, Beverly Briley. I don't know if you know that name or not. His house was not far from where Barbara lived, which tells you she was rich. And just kidding. They were richer than our family. But anyway, but it wasn't far away. Barbara and I lived literally 1 mile from each other. We went to the same congregation together. We were high school sweethearts, went to the same schools, all of that kind of stuff. So we've known each other from childhood, basically. Barbara says she met me much earlier than I met her. I don't remember her until I was like 14, 15. She says we knew each other before then. I have no recollection. But the reality is we grew up in this town. We grew up in this city. And the congregation that we attended, I was surrounded by children. The congregation divided us up into age groups. Most congregations do that. And our classes were bulging. We grew up in a congregation that had 500-600 people. And the classes were bulging. And I graduated with them. Spent my elementary, middle school, high school years with them. And most of them don't attend church anymore. This is not new. It gets discouraging because the boomers, we were so large that if you take away 30%, there's still a big chunk of 70% people left. And you think, oh, we're doing okay. The 1950s was the last time that church attendance was really large in the United States. 1950s. Do the math, 70 years ago. Ever since, it's been down, up, but never reached the height of the 1950s. This is not new. There have been spikes. There was a brief revival in church attendance in the 1970s. There was another one in the 1990s. There was another one, guess when? 2010s. But those revivals, those spikes, never quite got to the same level as the one before it. And none have ever approached the 1950s. Where are we right now? We're on the downside. Is that discouraging? Heard a guy say years ago, and it just still resonates with me, when it gets really dark, that's when the light shines. You see the light better in the dark. Oh, we got such an opportunity to be light in a very dark world. So instead of being discouraged, let's talk about what we can do, all right? And so today let's start with our relationship with God and how we view that relationship. And I'm starting off from this premise. How we view our relationship with God creates for us an identity. To put it in a different way, what God says about you is true, whether you believe it, feel like it, or accept it. What He says about you is true, whether you believe it, feel like it, or accept it. But if we can hang on to what He says about us being true, then we create an identity. We have an identity. We've got a generation who's looking for something to give them an identity. I'm talking to people who already have an identity. That identity, whether you recognize it or not, is found in your relationship with God. So let's talk about that relationship and make sure that your identity is in God so that you can share that with your children. You're saying, I'm already doing that. Okay, great. Then I'm going to give you some fine-tuning to that, okay? So let's start this way. There's a lady by the name of Diana Baumrind. Diana Baumrind began working on families and researching families, and particularly what she called parenting styles back in the 1960s. Her work has been continued by her proteges. She died back in the early 2000s, 2007, I think. But her work is just phenomenal work. What she did was she began to look at what kind of parents, how do parents discipline their children and maintain emotional closeness at the same time? You ever struggle with that? You got to discipline the child, but you want to say, I love you before, after, during, whatever, it's kind of like, I want to make sure you know I still love you, I'm not rejecting you. So she's intrigued by this, and she starts thinking, all right, so how do parents do that kind of thing? And she comes up with the idea that parents actually kind of fall out into four categories about rules and emotional closeness. Those two variables, those two dynamics. And she says there's a parenting style that's called authoritative. An authoritative parenting style are parents who have really high expectations for their kids, but they're also able to express a lot of emotional closeness. Want them to keep the rules, but they also want them to know how much they're loved. Really high in both. And she said, kids who grow up under this kind of parenting style tend to be very friendly kids. They tend to be very emotionally balanced kids. They tend to be kids who know how to do relationships well. They tend to be kids who function very well in an adult world when they get out there. This authoritative parenting style. We've got rules. Everybody knows what they are, but our love is not dependent upon your ability to we're going to love you. We're going to love you. We want you to keep the rules. We're going to love you. In this family, there's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of negotiation. There's a lot of communication between parents and child, especially as they reach the teenage years. My dad had a curfew for me. I started doing literal physical work when I was 12, when he told me, I asked him for $5 to go to the movie. And he handed it to me and he said, don't ever ask me for money again. My dad did not have a sense of humor, so I knew he wasn't joking. And I said, okay. And so at 12, it was like, I got to go find a job because there are movies I want to see. And so I started working at 12. My dad had a curfew for me because when I turned 16, I went to work for, are you ready? The Tennessean, delivering newspapers. And the Nashville Banner. Anybody remember those? Blast from the past, right? I delivered morning papers and afternoon papers. And then eventually settled on only the morning. If you delivered morning papers, you had to get up early. So I was up every morning at 3 a.m., did my route, then I went to high school, continued that job through college. That's how I paid for my college, delivering newspapers. I don't think you can do that anymore, but that's how I did it then. And in the meantime, a lot of that money was paying for gasoline, but a lot of that money was being spent for college, and a little bit of that money was being spent on Barbara for dates and that kind of thing. But Dad had a curfew. He said, you need your sleep. So I want you home at 11. He knew I got up at 3. So if I got home at 11, 4 hours. Dad thought I could handle that. That's good. 4 hours. I was over at Barbara's house one night and I went to sleep. I was tired. I went to sleep. And I missed curfew. And when I got home, it was like 10 after 11. And Dad was there. And he said, curfew's now 10:30. I said, can we negotiate this? He said, sure, it's now 10 o'clock. And I said, well, let's stick with 10:30 and see how I do with that. Let's see if I can manage that one. High expectations, firm rules, but lots of love. I give you that side of my dad. There were also plenty of times where I can remember riding in a car with him. I'm 14, and he just looks at me and he says, you ever thought about preaching? I said, no. He said, you really should think about that. I said, I think you've got the wrong son. And he said, Dana, he said, I don't know how to tell you how proud I am of you, how much I love you. He said, I think God has gifted you in a special way. And you should pay attention to that. And then he drove on. I can't tell you how many times he would just stop and just look at me and say, I'm proud of you. So high expectations, lots of love. That's authoritative parenting. Authoritarian parenting is high expectations, minimal love, minimal closeness. It's all about the rules and keeping the rules. In authoritarian, the language of the family of the authoritarian parenting is because I said so. Because I said so. A rule is given, the child wants to negotiate the rule, wants to try to understand the rule, and the response is, I'm the parent because I said so. That's the authoritarian. With that, especially as kids get into the teenage years, without negotiation, Baumrind found that these kids grow up and they really don't do life very well. They really don't know how to engage because they're looking for somebody to tell them what to do all the time. So they don't make really good decisions when they're forced into it. They kind of have to go with their gut, which is really not fully developed and mature because there's been very little connection. And so their gut is really just spur of the moment. And they tend not to make good decisions in life because they really need somebody to tell them what to do. That's all they've known. The third type she called permissive. Permissive parenting, lots of love, very low rules. Lots of love, very low rules. The rules, the language in this household sounds like this. You are so special. You are so wonderful. You are God's gift to this world. Don't let anybody stand in your way. That's it. Lots of love. Lots of love. Well, what about the rules? Rules don't really apply to you. Nobody says that. Nobody says that. But the school calls and says, we're having a little trouble with your child not behaving very well. Just love on them. Just listen, we don't have that problem at home because we just love on them. And if you love them enough, he'll eventually sit down. He'll get tired. But just love him. That's permissive parent. These kids tend to be really good at relationships. Really good. I mean, these are the people who know how to have fun. They know how to do relationship. They're very expressive in affection. People really like to be around them. But when they get married or get into a dating relationship that matters, there's no rules. And so, who pays the bills? Oh, let's just go on vacation. Well, what about the foreclosure notice? It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'll call the bank on Monday and we'll just talk it out. They'll love me. They'll love me. They'll listen. Now let's go get something to eat. Let's go to that fancy restaurant we've been wanting to go to. Know how to have fun, but don't know the rules. The fourth type, she called the neglected or rejected, neglectful or rejectful parenting style. These are parents who are very low in love and very low in rules. They're basically the parenting style of don't bother me and I won't bother you. Don't bother me and I won't bother you. These kids tend to grow up, especially in the teenage years. They not only can't do relationships very well, they can't follow rules either. And they tend to be very rebellious kids. Now, before you jump to a conclusion, are you suggesting that I'm a neglectful parent if my child is rebellious? No. In fact, if you go to the permissive side, these kids often are rebellious. If you go to the authoritarian side, these kids are rebellious. Rebellion seems to be an outcome of every parenting style except authoritative. And before you say, oh, okay, so I wasn't authoritative. No. Listen to me. There are rebellious kids in an authoritative parenting style too. You loved on them, you set the rules right, and they still rebel. What Baumrind shows us is that parenting styles when you've got kids at home matters. But the truth of the matter is our kids leave home and we don't really change parenting styles. Baumrind found that we're pretty consistent on parenting styles. Yes, people can, depending on situations, change a little bit, but ultimately, logically, we just pretty much stay with one parenting style. You decide which parenting style you had. Now that you know something a little bit about that, it doesn't mean that you were a good parent, bad parent, or whatever. It's just a parenting style. But if you're parenting the same way after the kids leave home, maybe there's an alteration that needs to take place. Maybe you need to make sure they understand the rules while showing them lots of love. Those are hard conversations to have, by the way. People get really rebellious when those conversations happen. But maybe you've been anything but authoritative when you were raising kids. Well, maybe it's time to say, let me tell you about the rules. Maybe you've already talked about the rules and they've rejected those rules. You still have the love side, and you still talk about love and how much you love your kids, how much you pray for them. What Baumrind shows us is that the reality of we never stop parenting. And just because our kids grow up and leave home doesn't mean we've stopped parenting. So let me go back and talk to you about a couple of generational differences a little bit more. Millennials and iGens desperately want to be respected. They want to be respected as adults. We make it hard, we boomers make it hard because we make fun of them. We tell jokes. There are great millennial jokes, by the way. There are just great millennial jokes out there. And we tell them and we laugh and we expect our children to laugh with us, and it's personal for them. It's not a joke. Millennials don't know how to work. That's just not true. They do. But one of the things that's very different about their generation from our generation is they refuse to work more and lose their families. They refuse. We hear this term work-life balance. Millennials and iGens, the ones who are starting to get out into the work world, work-life balance. I'll work 40 hours. I will, and I'll work hard. But I'm going to my kids' ball games. I'm going to be off when I'm supposed to be off. You can call me all day. I will not answer. This is my time. You had me for 40. You don't get me for 41. And we think, they don't know how to work. How did it work for us? Working 50 and 60 hours a week. How did it work? I was in full-time ministry for 25 years before I went to work at Freed Hardeman full-time, and now I'm in part-time ministry. Barbara would say I've never left full-time ministry, and there's probably truth to that, but I'm getting paid for part-time. You got it? Okay. Spencer, our son, was probably 7 years old, full-time ministry. My job, as I understood it, and what I believe the expectations were, if I wasn't visiting someone at night when they're at home, I needed to be at the building doing counseling with couples or individuals who needed counseling. 5, 6 nights a week, I was out. I'm not bragging. I'm ashamed of it. Don't think for a moment I'm bragging. Because at 7, Spencer looks at me as I'm walking out of the house on a Tuesday night, and he says, "Dad, are you going out again tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, buddy. I've got somebody to meet at the church building. I've got some counseling to do tonight." "Dad, can't you just stay home?" Because Barbara was putting them to bed. I wasn't there. She was putting them to bed. And I would come in and rush in, and they would just be in that twilight, just dropping off, and I'd kiss them and tell them I loved them, and they'd drop off to sleep, and they would see me in the morning. I got up at 4:30 then too. They would see me in the morning, but they wouldn't see me at night. I'm not proud of it. That's not a good thing. And so my son, Millennial, he's not being critical. He just says, I don't want that. I'm going to work at a job, and I'll work hard. He's a hard worker. He's a hard worker. They want something different. And it doesn't help for us to make fun of that, to poke fun at it, or to accuse them of something that is absolutely false. They know how to work. In fact, they know how to work better than we did, because they work really hard to find that balance. We should commend that. You know what one of the big differences is? Millennials want mentors. This is just blowing out the research. Nobody really saw this coming. What we're finding is these millennials and the iGens, as they're approaching adulthood, they want adults to stay involved in their life. They want mentors. This actually grows out of how they've been raised. In many cases, boomers went out to play. My mom would say, "Go play." What does that mean? Get out of the house. That's what that meant. Get out of the house. Go outside. And during the summer, if you didn't come in with the dirt necklace, do you know what I'm saying? If you didn't come in, you hadn't been playing, right? And so you come in at night, the dirt necklace. Some of you are looking at, what are you talking about? If you stay out long enough and sweat enough, you get this little bead of sweat down here and it in the crease, and it becomes a necklace of dirt. Okay, that dirt necklace. And you come in with that and you go, "I've been playing." And mom says, "Yeah, you have. Go take a bath," right? What did we do with our kids? We made sure that they were on ball teams or involved in certain activities. I played ball. We called it, backyard football. All the kids get together and go after it. We played ball. But organized sports, that was schools. If you were on a school team, you had organized sports. But sooner or later, the organized sports started coming in, and people said, "Okay, I want my kid on this team and this team," and we're running our kids around. Guess what? These millennials grew up being on teams, and they're very team concept oriented. They don't like hierarchies. They don't. They don't like the pinnacle view. Somebody's at the top and then there's a sharing of power down. It's flat. Where did they learn that? Everybody got a trophy. There was not an MVP. Everybody got a trophy. We called them what? Participation trophies. And every little child, even the child that's out in right field chasing the butterflies, give them a trophy. And what did they learn? It's flat. It's flat. It's not hierarchy. There's a coach, but what does the coach do? Coach doesn't go out there. Coach goes over, "Jimmy, we need you to pay less attention to the butterflies." But coach, I know. Now go on out there and do your best, but try not to pay attention to the butterflies. We don't want to say, you cost us 2 runs. We wouldn't say that. The coach wouldn't say that. It's all level. They still want it level. Even in churches. Uh-oh. Now I'm gone to meddling, even in churches, they want it level. They don't want a hierarchy. They want it level. And they're looking for mentors. They're looking for people who will come alongside of them, older adults, who will come alongside of them and walk with them in their journey. And they're looking for a coach. They're looking for a coach who will say, you know, Jimmy, this decision that you're making may not be the best thing for you. Let's talk about this decision. Not, Jimmy, what's the matter with you? You know what Scripture teaches. Hierarchy. Level. That's what millennials want. They want to be respected. They want to be treated as equals. They want mentors. They're not at the point of saying, leave us alone. They're saying, be involved, but talk to us. Don't talk down to us. Talk to us. That means that parenting style. When teenagers come along, I can remember mom and dad. Dad had the curfew. But when I got 16 and 17, the curfew was there. But we negotiated. Dad, listen. I don't need any sleep. Seriously, I don't. I don't need any sleep. I can make it without sleep. Sure, son. Listen, I'll get sleep tomorrow. Or when I die, whichever comes first. And let's talk about this curfew thing. I need to stay out till midnight tonight. Special night. And we would negotiate that. That's what millennials are wanting. They want people to come along and talk with them, not to them, not down to them, with them. I am talking to a bunch of people, and I understand you're here in large measure just for a variety of reasons. How can I say this? When you look around, I want you to, don't turn your necks yet. Okay, that makes everybody uncomfortable. But at the break, look around, and find out who's gonna help walk with you with your child, because this is your support group right here. These are the people who are in the same boat, have been in the same boat, will be in the same boat. These are the people who can walk with you as you walk with your child. And who can talk to you, not down to you, not at you, but talk with you as you walk with your child. Because it's real important to make sure your child knows what the rules are. But you can't talk down to them. They won't hear that. My son works for a company up in Minneapolis. They're based in Seattle, but they have a satellite in Minneapolis. And he was talking to me, and before he just got this job. Before he got the job, he had no less than 10 interviews. 10. I've never interviewed that much in my life for all the jobs I've ever had. I can't even count to 10. My newspaper job, I had an interview. I did. I talked to the guy who was the supervisor, and he said, you want this job? And I said, sure do. Okay, start tomorrow. That was the interview, right? We can't find anybody get up at 3 a.m. You're young. You're an idiot. Come on, do this job. And so my interviews have always been 10 interviews, no less than 10, and Barbara will say it was more than 10, and she's probably right. 10 different interviews, all at the same time. If the interview person didn't like him at that point, he didn't get the job. So 10 interviews, he had to impress 10 different people or more in order to get the job. I thought, wow. I said, what is that all about? Now, some of you who are in corporate world probably understand the mindset behind all of that. I'm just kind of flabbergasted by it all. And he says, it's because, there are C-level people. CEO, COO, CIO, CTO. There are C-level people. But they want everything to be flat. Because you don't know who you're going to be working with. I said, what's your job description? I don't know. Why are they hiring you? I don't know. My soft skills. They like my soft skills. That's different language to me. You know what soft skills are? Relational skills. That's what that means. Ability to get along. I didn't know there was a hard and soft skills. I thought that was a package deal. But no, they hire some because of the hard skills. They got all the technology behind them. And then they hire other people for the soft skills. His job is a consultant. That's his job. And he goes into the client and he just listens to them and he says, so let me ask you a couple of questions. And my son is so good at what he does. I'm going to brag on him. He's so good at what he does. He was with a CEO of a company and he's asking the CEO questions. And the CEO says, nobody's ever asked me these questions before. I don't know how to answer these questions. Let me get my team together and we'll talk about it and we'll come back and tell you what the answers are. And he signed up more business because of that. He's a consultant in this company. And if you're a consultant, everybody's on the same level. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about the C team or the D team. Everybody's on the same level. That's what they're looking for. Okay, I've ridden that horse enough. So let's, I have let the time get away. Look to Exodus chapter 34. Because I'm coming back to your relationship with God and how you view your relationship with God and how it affects your identity. Okay, very quickly. Exodus 32, Moses is up on Mount Sinai for 40 days, 40 nights. The people figure he's dead. So they come to Aaron and say, build us a golden calf. And Aaron says, he'll later say, I just threw the gold in the fire and this is what came out. Amazing how that happened. But he says, okie dokie, let's do that. You bring me all the gold stuff and we'll make a calf. And they do. Chapter 33, Moses has come down from the top of Mount Sinai. And in chapter 33, Moses and God have this conversation. And in chapter 33, God says to Moses, that's my paraphrase, he basically says, I am done. I made a promise. I will make sure the promise comes true. An angel will accompany you all the way to the promised land. But this is the last conversation we're having. Moses says, really? This is it? And God says, I'm not talking anymore. I'm done. And Moses says, kill me. Just kill me. Because I can't do this without you. I can't do this without talking to you. I can't do this without this communication. The Bible makes it sound like God changed his mind. Listen. I am convinced God already knew what the outcome was going to be. I don't believe in a God who is all-knowing up until tomorrow. He already knew what the answer was going to be and what he was going to do. This was about Moses. This was about Moses saying, hey, my faith is not in my leadership. My faith is in you. And I can't do this without you. I can't be the leader you want me to be if you're not by my side, and I know you're by my side. My paraphrase again, God looks at Moses and says, you're a pretty righteous fellow. In fact, I don't think there's anybody on earth quite like you. You're pretty special. Did it take Moses saying that for God to know that? No, he's just affirming what Moses has just said. I agree with you. You're pretty special. Moses says, do you mean it? He says, yes. Moses says, well, I got a favor to ask. Okay, name it. I want to see you face to face. I want to see your face. I've heard your voice. I want to see your face. God says, we could do that, but then I'd have to kill you. So let's try an alternative. How about if I allow you to see me walking away? Let you see the back of me. Moses says, will that do it? Come back up on top of the mountain. I'll put you in a cleft of the rock. I'll cover it with my hand, and I'll become this temporary humanoid figure, and I'll walk by you. And when I walk by you, I'll remove my hand so you can see my back. You tell me what you think. Exodus 34. Beginning in verse 6. Verse 5. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. We just kind of read over that. God's introducing himself to Moses. You remember the first time he did that? At the burning bush. You remember what he said his name was? I am. Which is two simple words, right? But the Hebrew is actually a word that means I was what I was, I am what I am, I will be what I will be, deal with it. In other words, you can't really define me, you can't really understand me. I'm giving you a name that will be acceptable to you, a name that you can at least go, Yahweh, Jehovah. So now he's going to reintroduce himself. This time, not in a burning bush, but as a human-like figure. And he says, the Lord, the Lord. That makes me kind of smile. Like, who else would it be? I'm covering you with my hand, I pull it away. The Lord, the Lord. Why does he announce himself? Have you ever thought about this? Why does he announce himself? Think. Why does he announce himself? Because there's no one like him. There's no one like him. And when it's all done, what he's going to do is show Moses a brief look at a human-type figure. But what he's announcing is, here's my character. Here's the reality of who I am. As best as you can understand it, because you can't understand it. Because if I showed it to you fully, it would kill you. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands of generations, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the father to the third and fourth generation. There's so many things I want you to know, but here's how you view God affects how you are in relationship with him. How you view God affects the kind of relationship you have with him. If you think God is a punishing God, then that affects how you're in relationship with him. You operate out of fear. You operate out of guilt. You operate out of, I got to do better. You operate out of perfectionism. If, however, you view God as compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love, extending love to the thousands of generations. If that's your view of God, then your relationship with him is based upon mercy and grace. And however you view God, your kids have watched how you view God. And they've learned from you about God, what kind of God he is. When you read through this, by the way, this passage becomes the springboard for almost every prophetic message from this point on. Almost every prophet quotes, in part, this passage. Especially when the prophets are calling for people to repent. Did you hear that? Every prophet, almost every prophet, Obadiah is an exception, one chapter he didn't get it in. Almost every prophet quotes part of this verse, if not its entirety. And they always do it in the context of saying, listen to the character of the God that's asking you to repent. Listen to the character. Yes, I know he says punish. I know he said, I read it. I know he says, what does he say? I will punish to what generation? Up to the third or fourth. What does he say about love to how many generations? Thousands, which means there's no end. There's no end. Can God punish? Absolutely. We looked at this last night in Isaiah 1. What is God's heart? What is His heart? Come, let's talk. Come. It doesn't mean He diminishes the rules, but in the heart of God, in the mind of God, in the character of God, it is, listen, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love, forgiving. This is the character of God. Then He says, but I will punish. Don't hear me say God would never punish. He says He will. I believe Him. But that's not the part He wants you to focus on. The part, here's Moses. He's up on the mountain. God says, I am sick of the people that I've released out of Egypt. They don't even believe me. Moses says, I believe you. And so now he says, Moses, let me share something about my character and my heart. You can reveal to your children the character of God. Did God have rules? Absolutely. You know, the golden calf resulted in a bunch of people getting killed, didn't it? Punishment. He has rules. But listen to His heart. Hear what He says. Here's my focus. Do that with your kids. Make sure they know the love. Make sure they know that in repentance, in the discussion, in the opportunity to talk about the rules, there's slow to anger, forgiveness, patience, love, compassion. That puts it on equal level. I have some questions for you for a breakout group. Like we did last night, just kind of work with the people that are close to you and talk about these questions. We're going to take a little bit more time than we took last night. I think we only took 15 minutes. We'll take 17. And no, I'm just joking. We'll take a few more extra minutes and let you have a little bit more time to discuss, and then we'll come back and start again, okay? Before we do that, let me pray with you, okay? Father, you have taken the time in our lives, but in the lives of all your people, to reveal your character. You have accommodated our inability to know you fully and deeply by giving us images and words that we can understand. So we pray as we walk with our children that we, like you, will reveal your character to them just as you've revealed it to us. Compassionate, merciful, loving, forgiving. And in that conversation, over and over again, may we help our children see you. It's through Jesus that we pray. Amen.